What's up, Cats fans? Welcome to a new edition of the Sunday recorded episode of The Hoop Show anyway. My name is Paul James. I'm adopting the hosting role from Ben today, but in his absence, we've brought in an awesome second chair for this episode. Jack Turner, how's things, mate?
Very well, mate. Thank you. Appreciate being here. Been dropping in watching for a year or so it's nice to be on for a change.
No, that's awesome. And I guess before we really dive into the week that was, the Cats game that we watched just a couple of hours ago at this point, a little bit about yourself for anyone who maybe is unfamiliar. Who are you? What do you do? What should people know you from? What should they be tuning into after this show?
Yeah, so I'm a co-host on a podcast called The Back Pocket, which originated from a 1am text message with my housemate about how there's not enough recognition for defenders, and we should start a podcast for that. And originally we just started off with having votes and a medal, and now it's kind of all footy. A lot of discussion there, so it is cool. It's been fun. Getting a bit more traction this year, which is good. So
awesome.
You can find us at the Back Pocket AU pretty much anywhere. And the two little men in a pocket of a pair of footy shorts is how you'll notice us.
Yeah, it's a nice distinctive logo, so absolutely check it out, and it's really awesome content as well, having tuned in and checked out quite a few, similar as you were saying about the Hoop Show over the last year or so. I've been kind of dialing into a few episodes here and there, and the chemistry is always fantastic, and it's always a good listen. So please make sure, anyone watching and listening today, make sure to go tune into the Back Pocket content there. It's some really awesome stuff. And Jack, you've jumped in at a good time. Maybe even me jumping into the chair is a good time as well, because the Cats have had a win. A
nice change.
Unlike the last 3 weeks. So maybe the Ben era is over. Maybe I need to host every episode because he's just some sort of curse on the whole thing. Or it's you.
Yeah, I'm big for charms. My co-host didn't watch the second half of that game today, and that was when it took off. So yeah. I think I'm banning him from watching Geelong games for the rest of the year. It's a big turnaround on the last few weeks.
Yeah, it was quite something, and yeah, I'm certainly keen to subscribe to the curse or hoodoo sort of idea as well. Considering Catriona Rountree was quick to try and suggest that I was potentially going to be a curse when I started finally going to footy games towards the back end of the year last year, and thankfully wasn't. So I can I can wash myself of any of these sort of Geelong related issues. But Ben, you're gone, and we finally get a win, mate. Just saying.
It's a worry. So he's got to stay in Bali. Basically, is the call.
Yep. Ship off. We'll see you in October. Don't come back grand final day. All right, so Cats and the Hawks. The game has been run and won, and I guess before we really dive into kind of the finer details of the thing, what was your top level perspective on the game? What did you make of the result? It was a very, very comprehensive win for the Cats in the end. The final scores being 127-45 after trailing at half time. 19 goals, 13 to 6-9. What do you think?
Yeah, it was hard to know exactly what to make of it, because the second half was a more extreme version of what I probably expected going in. I think Hawthorn have shown this year that they can let teams that are able to attack let runs of goals happen on them. I think it's the second time they've had 13 in a row kicked.
This year alone?
Yeah, this year alone. So that's not great. But that third term, like regardless of where either team sits, it's the most a team has kicked while holding the opposition to zero since like 1966. So it's comprehensive.
Flowing already.
Regardless, it's comprehensive either way. So it was that second half was what we wanted. I think it was what was missing last week. The first 2 weeks were probably fair, but it was a huge win. I think performances from some players that had been a bit down as well. Like a Brad Close looked really good. Guthrie looked really good. Some big change there was really helpful.
Yeah, it was a really interesting one because, and I think you touched on it really well. I think this performance, I guess more specifically the second half of this week, really, I think, drives home the point that we can probably still ignore last week. And I think what we look at, when we kind of circle in on that second half, and more specifically the third quarter, it was really what the club had been trying to execute in the first couple of weeks and couldn't quite, and that's why they ultimately netted small losses to fantastic teams. Yeah. Whereas today it finally started to click into gear against a team that obviously is most likely going to be bottom of the ladder, if not awfully close to it. So they had a really soft target. They probably copped a serve at halftime because they weren't. You could still see that kind of lethargic sort of approach in the first half, but then with the rocket up them, it clicked early in the half, and then almost that momentum, like, okay, this is what we've been looking for. All of a sudden, and you touched on a few of those players. Your Cam Guthrie's got into the game, although his disposal's still a little bit off. I think he needs still a little bit more time to kind of get going again. Hawk got into it. Stengel started to get into it again. A bit of polish for Stengel as well, but close. Miers, all those link-up players that we've been and I say royal we here, kind of Geelong supporters more broadly, have been getting a little bit critical of lately because they've not been hitting the scoreboard. They've not necessarily been lighting it up numbers-wise. They all of a sudden start to play their role perfectly because everything around them is starting to hum. It was a really, really good second half and a positive sign going into gather round next week with the Eagles and then hopefully a win in the grand final rematch the week after against the Swans.
Yeah, I think the epitome of that is Brad Close, who's a player that I've loved for years. And his first 3 weeks were probably some of the slowest and least Brad Close football I've seen him play.
Yeah.
Whereas today he was playing his normal game again, higher linking up, kicking inside. Some of his hitting targets inside 50 today was phenomenal.
I was taking the piss at times.
Yeah, so and sometimes it's good to have a game like today to find some form back. I think that you can't always say that it's just against a weak team because it's still a really dominant performance, and a lot of players will take the confidence out of that they were clearly lacking. And then there were a lot that the first 3 Hawthorn goals all came from either in the centre of the ground or in their forward line, really clumsy free kicks from players who would know better. And that's a big part of it. Like there was a lot of Geelong error resulting in opposition scoring, and that's true for last week as well. So in the second half, that just clamped down. And the one negative to come out of the game was Jed Hughes getting concussed, but if there's a positive from that, it means that Radigali is probably safe in the back line for another week. And I'm really enjoying watching him sometimes clumsily, but launch of the footy back there is just a highlight week after week.
Yeah, he does bring some baby giraffe qualities to it every now and then with kind of all arms and legs, but it's largely working for him. So we can deal with that for now. And then I guess the big question mark will start to emerge when the likes of Jack Henry start to come online and whatnot. But yeah, even those first couple of goals were kind of interesting ones because I would also argue, look, there was some clumsy behaviour in there. But I also felt like there were some poor decisions, and I felt vindicated when I got a message from a good mate of mine who was a groomsman at my wedding, who also unfortunately happens to be a Hawthorn supporter, who was even going, "Mate, we didn't deserve those. They were like that was wrong," which was nice. It didn't help when I was looking at the scoreboard though, but it was nice to go, "Oh, hang on," an honest Hawthorn supporters chirping up here and saying, "They're like in my corner. I can deal with that."
30 or 40 disposals to 10 as well. It was like, oh, okay, we can't even touch the thing. But definitely turned around. In the second quarter, it started to, but
for sure,
cruising.
Yeah, I mean, you even look at the contested ball numbers in the second quarter. So obviously, anyone who follows the stats at all knows that there's the quarter by quarter breakdowns of that sort of stat. And we obviously got crunched in the first quarter there. Second quarter, it started to level up. I think we maybe trailed them by 1 in the second term in the end, but it was looking bad early, and you could see things starting to fire up in the second half of that second quarter. And then obviously they just kind of obliterated them from that point onwards. And you could see players starting to rise to the occasion. You could really see Tom Atkins from almost out the gate, and it just took a little while for other players to really start to gel around him. Like he was not taking prisoners throughout the entire game.
Much more of an Atkins game this week as well. I really liked Danger's attack on the player and the footy as well. I thought his tackling game was really good. And they were the bodies that have been lacking. The contested ball's been down, clearance has been down, and that was really back to where it should have been this week.
So he's hoping that's a really good sign going into a game against the Eagles, who, look, admittedly they got smacked by the Demons this week, but they didn't disgrace themselves. I felt, especially the likes of TK did really well too.
I was at the Derby last week, and I genuinely think if they hadn't had the injuries they had, they would have rolled Freo.
Yep.
And when you got 7 players down in the last term, you're always going to struggle. So there's definitely a lot more fight there this year, but the personnel they've got, I think, is going to be their biggest issue.
Yeah. So as we kind of start to wrap a little bit on the Hawks and the Cats game, some, I guess, ticks and crosses. What did you like? What didn't you like? We'll start with the positives for starters. What were some of the big highlights for you out of the game, without tipping your hand to your votes just yet?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked Zach Guthrie, as he's been probably the player this year that I've seen play just as well as last year.
Yeah.
A lot of players have been trailing. He was really good. Really liked Tom Stewart on return. Last week he was brilliant. This week he played a more defensive role, played that last man, in the hole. But there were so many times in that first half where he was just smothering or pressuring and keeping that ball from getting through the sticks. So there were some huge yeses from me. Loved their games, and Guthrie, obviously we already highlighted, that was getting a lot more of the contested footy that he hasn't been in the past few weeks.
Yeah, 100%. For me, it was things like, and I've kind of already touched on it a little bit, but some of those players that were kind of, for want of a better phrase, starting to come online a little bit. Hawkins, Stengel, Ollie Henry's second half was fantastic. Like, if it weren't for the fact that we obliterated them by so much in that third quarter, you'd go, he was the change in the game, really, because from moment one, he really like his intensity was right up. He was throwing himself at the ball. He was everywhere for quite a period at the very beginning there, and kicked a few quick early goals as well. So he was fantastic. The midfield, the whole unit really again started to come online there. And then we've already touched on the link guys being Gryan and Brad Close, who, because of what was going on around them, started to come into the game in the way that we know they can absolutely play.
Yeah, for sure. I think even going back to Henry, I'm going to maintain that he was robbed of that goal. I don't know why we've got the edge.
That was rubbish.
If we're not checking it, I couldn't comprehend that. But outside of that, he's now surround the ball and quick thinking was really good in that second half. And I thought he was all right in the first 2 weeks. Last week was a bit quiet, but looked really good after he came on.
Yeah, well, I guess that probably segues across to the crosses a little bit, because I think Ollie Henry's going to be holding on to his spot simply due, if nothing else, due to the fact that Gary Rohan's probably going to get a week, you'd think, for that tackle.
It was a weird, can't defend Rohan on the act, but I have to feel like the act wouldn't have happened if the umpire hadn't done the weird advantage, not advantage situation that left Gath just standing stationary. But yeah, no, it's definitely at least a week. Probably just the one. We saw last week someone get the 1 week for no concussion with that.
Yeah, for the act for no consequence, yeah.
But yeah, it was a bit clumsy. So yeah, Henry definitely stays in, I think, for that. My other cross was just watching Stengel couldn't buy a goal. I felt bad for him. The players are trying to get the ball to him. Even when he found himself in the right situation, he just couldn't manage to get it to work. But there wasn't much to dislike outside of those incidents, other than Blixarth's ribs, which I hope are okay.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I'll throw that up for conversation a little bit later on, because I think there's a big conversation that needs to be had about this ruck contest and the knee being raised sort of thing. But I guess the other cross for me, we've already touched on a little bit. Yeah, Cam Guthrie and just his disposal, but starting to accumulate, which is a fantastic start. And Stengel, who, outside of, I think, like some real easy Joe the Gooses that he was kind of thrown in the goal square that he couldn't possibly screw up, it's just off. He hasn't found it yet. It hasn't clicked, but he'll get there.
In that last term, there's a few times where they were clearly trying to look for him inside 50 to really bring him into the game, and even then it just wasn't clicking together for anyone. So I think it'll come. We know the quality's there, but it was a bit hard to watch today when the team was so dominant and they just couldn't quite get him to play his natural game. But
yeah, I mean, look, he's going to be under a lot more scrutiny from defenders this year. You can't be an All-Australian, kick 50-plus goals like he did, light it up on grand final day, and then expect to get left alone. So he's going to have to learn how to handle that extra pressure that's going to come his way. But also, it wasn't really there today, I felt. It was just a case of, as we've said, it's just not clicking for him. So, I don't know. We'll see how it goes for him going forward.
Yeah, and that'll hopefully that'll come, but... And the other one's Jaron Cameron almost knocking himself out on an umpire.
Oh, yeah.
They both seem to be fine. That is my highlight of the week. I'm going to be... every time that comes on, I'll probably laugh again. I think that was a weird moment.
The memes are flowing already. There's plenty across the internet about that particular incident already. Of course, for anyone who wants to make the stupid jokes, he's not going to get a consequence there.
Looking the other way, it was nothing. Just
had no idea he was there.
Something about him just cuddling him back to his feet was just a real footy moment that I enjoyed.
Yeah, and just a totally unsurprising Geelong moment. Like, there might be others that bowl over the umpire, and I don't want to just sit there and go, look how much better we are. But also we lost to Gold Coast and still stood there for David Swallow. So yeah, it was one of those things where, like, bowled over an umpire. A lot of other players will apologise, hand up, and then trot off. Jeremy Cameron's just bear hugged him back to the ground and made sure he's okay. And then I suspect he probably wasn't going to go off, but maybe if he just run off the ground and go, oh, jeez, he hurt me, that up.
Massive credit to the umpire to get back up and just run straight back to position, though. That was, I wager if Jeremy Cameron ran through me at that speed, I'd have stayed on the ground a bit longer. But,
yeah.
He was up and back to position and ready to go. So,
well, I mean, maybe Jeremy had kind of done him dirty in that instance by helping him up to his feet. He's like, I can't just flop back down to the ground now, can I?
Right.
I'm going to have to just cop this. If I fall to the ground, I'm never going to... It's already going to get played at the umpires meeting tomorrow, I'm sure. So, poor sod.
Yeah, no, it was good though. And just added to the feel-good second half of the game. Not for probably Hawks fans, but as a Cats fan watching it, it just added to the fun.
And as just someone who doesn't like the Hawks off the back of 2008, it's good to see him get smacked. So
it is. Every win's beautiful at this rate.
And offsetting that rubbish that we touched on before the show about this time last year, where we threw what should have been an easy win away against them. So
Yeah, absolutely. But it all turned around from there. So hopefully
Yeah.
they're also the turnaround game this year.
Yeah, hopefully it is the big point that kind of shifts the needle a little bit for the Cats, because things are looking all right. On to the votes.
Yes.
What is very quickly going to become the Jeremy Cameron medal, I think, at this point. But right now, it's still the Brad Close medal. What was your 3-2-1 for this week?
3-2-1 down or up?
Let's go. Well, let's just start at the 3, because I think it's pretty obvious.
Right,
I think more drama is around who's 2-1 for the both of us.
I don't think you can have a 22 disposal 7-goal game and not get 3 votes.
You watch the umpires will find a way.
That was one of the most dominant performances I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Backing up 2 weeks ago against Carlton was probably just as good. Did it again. It's probably the most concerning thing about Geelong this year is the Jeremy or bust rate they've gone at.
Yeah.
But when he's that good, it makes it less concerning, because he brings everyone else into the game with him, human wrecking ball, and just finds the sticks like no one I've ever seen.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it was an interesting one in that sense, because he kept us afloat in the first half. Like, obviously, we probably could have and should have been maybe 5 goals down at halftime had it not been for Jeremy Cameron. He kicked 4 in the first half.
Yeah, I think it was 3 in the first half.
And set up 1 or 2 others.
Desperately needed, yeah.
And then actually kind of, well, he didn't get quieter, but he just kind of maintained that through the second while everyone else lifted. So it was kind of good to see, like, if he can continue to maintain that, kick 2 or 3 a half or something like that, and then everyone else starts to rise the occasion and kick 3 or 4 a quarter around him, like, that'll be the everything that we've been talking about going into the season, where you'd like to think the Cats would improve.
Yes,
that was kind of it there. So
Hawkins looking a bit fitter again really made Jez look a bit better as well. Both of them began to get up the ground and take marks. Really influenced Cameron's ability to get back to the goal line and kick more goals as well.
For sure. So yeah, Hawk getting up and about is a good sign as well. Your number 2?
Number 2 for me was probably not hugely surprising to me either. Was Dangerfield. I think his game was huge. His contested game, which we've desperately needed, was massive. And him kicking a set shot goal from 40 out, which is basically his kryptonite. When the game it was just when that started to get going as well. Loved it. Played a really good game. Exactly what we needed from a captain after the few weeks we've had. And I think he's been trying the last few weeks, so the effort's been there. But like a lot of blokes, it just hasn't been able to fall into
execution.
Place. Today it really did. He played a powerful game for the middle of the ground.
And your number 1?
My number 1 was maybe a surprise to some people, was Miers. And I got a lot of first half bias from me. I think in that first half, his pressure and corralling was insane. I think he had something like 10 score involvements as well in the end. So
that's huge.
Did a really good link up game. But yeah, his first half being as good as his second half, which most blokes out there couldn't have said, brought him into that for me. Pretty close calls with Mitch Duncan for that one vote. But I just think, the way he played in that first half was great.
Yeah, I thought he played a fantastic game. We've touched on that a fair bit already. And you're absolutely right. It was one of those that was consistent the whole way through the game. And so definitely earns extra credits for that, if nothing else. For me, 100% agree with you on Jeremy Cameron at the 3. Again, that wasn't really the point of conversation here. So we can kind of move on to the 2 votes there, which I gave to Mitch Duncan. As you highlighted, was kind of, raffling for your 1. Look, maybe it's a little bit of a look what happened when Mitch Duncan returns sort of bias. It kind of creeps into it, but I've been saying for weeks, like, he was the one. We can talk about Tom Stewart, and absolutely Tom Stewart can intercept. Zach Guthrie had been doing it, as you've touched on. Zach Guthrie had not lowered his colours all season and was really playing that role. He did a fantastic job when Tom Stewart was out last year, playing that exact same role. I think the two of them, those two actually need to learn a little bit about each other and how to keep out of each other's way, because they do try and both fly for the same thing. And then you add Asava in there as another who just wants to crash and try and take a hanger as well. That is a potential risk for him. And every now and then Hawthorn did get out the back because they all spoiled each other. But Mitch Duncan is that different sort of a halfback. Well, not different. He's actually more what you tend to expect from your standard halfback, where breaks from the line, his kicking is sensational. Hardly missed a beat. It looked like he hadn't missed a game all season.
Yeah, he had a few moments earlier where you're like, okay, he's been out for a bit when he got caught holding the ball and then fell in someone's back. But then after that, his ball use is, we know it's always been elite, but it just brought something that Geelong's severely been lacking up until this point. And whether it was the last kick towards the 50 or the first kick from 50, just finding a target that was clear and had time to turn and run really brought back that game style that was so successful last year. And it was just, you could see the difference having him out there, and the boys lifted as well.
Yeah, they really all did a great job. And number 1 for me is Max Holmes, who, again, similar to Gryan Miers, just kind of played the game all day, didn't really dip, didn't necessarily light it up either, but he was always there, that next step in the chain. Got the running game going on a few occasions. There was a few times like, just go, because you know what he can do, and he'd break there. That, to Hawthorn's credit, there was a few times where they really corralled that run from him pretty well. Like, they knew what was going to happen, and at least, took what could have been a 20, 30 metre dash and cut it in half. But he would still make fantastic choices. He was excellent. I was thrilled with his game. So
it's been interesting this year to see how Geelong are weighing up his inside versus outside game, because obviously he can play a really good contested game, but I think he's so valuable when you can give him that outside run, when he can be that first disposal out of a pack that just takes off. He was really good. His pressure is, I think, an underrated part of his game at this point.
Yes.
Like, we love watching him run, and he can kick it, 50, 60 metres just about any time on both feet. But I think his pressure is unheralded. And in that first half, especially as well, being able to corral the ball carrier and keep the Hawthorn inside 50s down was a huge part of why Geelong was able to turn it around. Yeah,
I mean, he's bringing that kind of physicality from the inside midfielder thing, but he's got the speed of an outside player, well, extreme speed of certain outside players. It's a pretty scary pairing if he can really refine that craft in the heat of the contest. So good luck to teams in the next few years.
Well, Dangerfield who can kick is really the Holmes build. I'd like to see that if it works.
I don't know if you can have that perfect of a player, can you?
No, it's a bit harsh. I feel like you'd have to be about 20 kilos heavier, but
inside, outside, maybe it's Chris Judd, Gary Ablett. That's what we're talking about. But actually probably closer to Judd because there's a bit more speed with Judd than Ablett. But
Danger did make the big call at the start of the year that he reckons Holmes will be the best player in the comp in 5 years.
I do recall that. Yeah, it's
maybe he was onto something.
No, that's an excellent call. All right, well we'll go more broadly now to AFL wide things and the round that we've just seen. Was there anything in particular, because we've had obviously, like, we were the final game of the round, it took us an eternity to get to this point, but we've had 8 other games that have been played prior. Was there anything that really caught your eye out of those 8 different games that we've seen?
I'm not sure if I could have a season consistently confuse me any more than this week. We, on the back pocket last week, we said that Ken Hinkley was probably the coach in most trouble.
Yep.
And then they go and have an inspiring win like that. They hit the lead with only a few minutes to go with a great goal against the runner-up from last year, who were cruising up until this point, really. And now they've lost 2 big games. So not knowing who the favourite is, I think, is the biggest trouble at the moment. St Kilda had a big start to last year, faded out. Collingwood have now lost a game to a team that everyone thought they would have beaten, Brisbane. Melbourne have had some pretty disappointing losses. Sydney have lost 2 on the trot. It's hard to say. I think the biggest storyline out of this week is Freo, and where are they headed?
Yeah.
They're a team that I had fighting for a top 4 spot last year. I probably would have had them 3-1 or 4-0 looking at this fixture at this point of the year. And they've won a game against an injured West Coast.
Yeah, that they might have been lucky to win if you really, as you said before, where they were 7 players down. What was it? Yeah, 7 in the end.
Yeah. West Coast kicked the first goal of the last quarter to make it 2 points the difference, and then just had no run. So take that out of occasion, they could be 0-4, and that's a real worry for a team that was really good last year.
So you're a WA guy. So I mean, what are you seeing? What are you hearing when it comes to Freo at the moment?
The problem over here is West Coast still just the dominant brand. So it's just you hear more doom and gloom about West Coast than you hear anything else.
Really, despite the
there's a lot of that about it. West Coast fans are one way or the other. They're either eternally optimistic and think they should have won every game and it was only injuries or umpires that didn't get them there, or they're doom and gloom in the complete opposite direction. Freo fans, it's hard because they're kind of used to it. I feel like after so many times of being almost there and then falling away desperately, it's hard to be shocked anymore for a Freo supporter when they have another drop. So I would say they're struggling. It's just they're consistently that team that you expect to do really well and then they fall off. So where they go from here will be really telling of them as a football club, I think, and as Longmuir as a coach.
That's fair. For me, the game that sticks out the most, besides our own one, is actually North and Carlton. And
that's a quality game of football, considering.
Yeah, not because the result was necessarily a surprise, but just like we knew what was going to be the big concern for North going into the week, simply because they had no key backmen. They were all gone, and they had to deal with 2 of the very best. And those 2 best are the difference. But they put up one hell of a fight, and had it not been for a little bit of a last quarter surge, nearly pinched the game. So all credit to Clarko and what he's been doing with the squad there, and a lot of the strategic stuff, because really it had to be strategy that was going to get them over the line, because they couldn't punch back when it came to Charlie and Harry.
I think especially with Larky having so little of an influence, that they did a really good job, and especially in that first half, they really fought. Their midfield was great. I think Simpkin and Davies Uniacke is going to be huge for them in the coming years. But there's a lot of positive signs for North, except for losing to Hawthorn, which is probably the biggest negative you could have this season. But knocking off both WA teams and then really showing it up to Carlton, who look like they're going to be a genuine top 4 side this year. They'd be pretty happy where they're at, I think.
Yeah, it's a tick for North so far, and yeah, it certainly shows that the Clarko appointment, pending all of the other drama that he's still embroiled in, seems to have been a good one.
Yeah, from a coaching perspective, and it would be the worst thing to happen to North if mid-season something comes of that and he has to has a suspension or a step down or whatever. But
yeah,
outside of that, really positive things for them. Having Sonia Hood back at the footy was great for them, and I think
that's true. That was huge, especially given the occasion.
Yeah, the Good Friday appeal was great as well. The atmosphere of that ground was brilliant. Even watching on TV, you could hear how into it the crowd was from both teams, and having all the kids there was great. It was a really good day for footy, I think.
Bit of a shame Mark Murphy tweaked his hammy during his little shootout against Boomer.
I'd argue it was the most Mark Murphy thing he could have done, though.
Innocuous, nothing.
Yeah, just a little. Oh, there it is. It's gone. But that was a really good moment too. I really enjoyed.
And so, shootout. With all those games now done, and looking at the ladder, how are you seeing things form? Is this starting to kind of take a shape that you might have predicted at the beginning of the season? Are we still a bit of a mess right now? You've kind of touched on it with the results, but is there starting to develop some patterns that you would have picked?
Yeah, before the season started, I had Melbourne and Sydney as my big favourites.
Yeah.
I think last year was somewhat of an anomaly for Melbourne. They had a few injuries and also maybe a little bit of a premiership hangover. And
a delayed one.
They're the one that's a
bit like a Jet Hughes concussion, a delayed one.
But Sydney not so much. But Melbourne really are still looking like the team that we know they can be. Their wins against good teams have been really good. They're right up there. But it's the Essendon being in there and St Kilda at the top is just it looks unnatural to me with the least defence possible to those sides. But with St Kilda's injury list, you could almost form a team as good as the current St Kilda team.
Yeah,
and they're on top of the ladder and haven't lost yet. So it's really hard to see how they can fall. But they managed it last year to go from
probably
top 4
find
to
a way.
Yeah, it's the St Kilda way. But they're playing really exciting footy. Probably the best to watch in the comp at the moment, I think.
Yeah, they're playing a really exciting brand.
Absolutely.
Which is not what you pick from Ross Lyon either, considering he used to be the stop and start and really kind of the core of that ultra defensive, slower game that we saw for a decade.
Yeah, it was interesting because I really thought that was going to be a weird appointment for that reason, because that was part of their issue was that they couldn't get the ball moving fast enough, and well, he's changed that for sure. They've got a real play on and run game, and they kick it long, and it's paying off. It brings their small forwards into it with the chaos ball in, especially with Membry and King out. So it'll be interesting to see how long they can go for. I don't know when Geelong play them. I think it's still a while off. So it's a game I'll be looking forward to because there's always a bit of spite in those. So
I'll try and take a bit of a look while we're chatting there. But yeah, for me, you've touched on they are a strange question mark at the moment with what's going on there. But at the same time, the Saints supporters have obviously had a pretty tough time for decades now. So soak it up, guys. If you end up going on to win the premiership, there's worse teams that could have won it. So I can deal with that.
Round 23, Cat Saints, I think.
Is it that long?
Yeah.
Literally the final game of the season.
Year.
Oh, no, second last, right, because of gather round.
So that could be a big game if they're
still trucking along.
Yeah, it'd be good to see.
The Bombers, Ben keeps I know it kind of seems very weird for them at the moment, and Ben tipped him for top 4 before the season started, which I just thought was stupid, and I still think it's stupid. The fall is coming. They take on Melbourne this week. That'll be the reality check. They play Collingwood the week after. Now, obviously, Anzac Day can kind of throw up some strange things, but you would still like to think that the Pies get that done. They then play Geelong, Port Adelaide, in Adelaide. The reality check is this close. So I think...
Yeah, it's interesting. I know, had they kicked straight against Cheetah West this week, it could have been an absolute massacre.
A blowout, yeah.
Which was the same as Carlton versus Cheetah West last week. So maybe they've made a deal with some kind of trickster spirit to keep teams not able to kick goals. But
yeah, they've done a good job.
It is interesting that the team Essendon have beaten haven't been enough really to convince me yet.
Yeah.
They came up against a good side in St Kilda and lost pretty convincingly, kind of made a little fake comeback at the end. But yeah, they do have some good sides coming up that'll really let us know where they're at more than we've seen so far.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think if they've got, like I said, they've got Melbourne, Collingwood, and Geelong in their next 3. Now, if they win 2 out of those 3, then it's time to really take them seriously.
Absolutely, real deal if they can win even won and split the difference on the other two in terms of closeness.
Yeah, possibly.
I
Yeah.
think we'd be able to consider them a good threat. Because the problem was, even a couple of years ago when they made the 8, they only beat one top 8 side, which was a team that sent them packing the next week. So it's about beating teams that are in contention, and if they can get just 1 or 2 wins out of that pack, then they've done a really good job.
Yeah, so I guess good luck to them, but yeah, I don't necessarily see it yet. The other interesting one is the form of the Tigers at the moment. Now, injury is playing a part in that as well.
Had added to that with Vancouver's this week.
Exactly, but they're not. It's not looking good. Like it kind of shows that they might have been lucky to hold on against Carlton. Had it not been for that,
I was gonna say what looks like their best performance so far is against Carlton. And obviously they've won another game, but that looked like their best game so far. And it just, the concerns keep piling up when you can add. Realistically, didn't have Martin last year, so they've added Martin, Taranto, and Hopper to that midfield effectively, and it doesn't look any better. Which begs the question of what's kind of going wrong with the rest of the mix. That Nankervis was the informed ruckman really of the comp until this week, and their midfield is stacked, and they just haven't been able to capitalise.
Yeah.
Bulldogs haven't shown me enough to say that they're a huge threat either. So
that's why I think this week sticks out even more.
Won. Yeah. So who knows where they're at? I'm sure their fans will have a lot to say all over the internet because there's a lot of them and they're very loud. But
shut up,
it'll be an interesting few weeks for Richmond, I think, to see where they're really sitting this year.
Yeah, it could be very extreme in either direction, I think. And the Tom Lynch suspension / surgery on his foot is only going to make it worse. So I suspect the suspension is going to mean nothing to him now because it seems like the foot injury is going to keep him out for even longer.
Yeah, probably saves them a challenge at the tribunal if, they give him a 3-week suspension, he's out for 5 with a foot, they'll probably just go, just cop that, that's fine. So
in terms of the incident itself, because it is probably a point of conversation, and we can kind of use that to segue into the kind of the next sequence here, talking about some other news that's been going on. What do you make of that contest? Because I watched it live and I thought nothing of it. I thought, okay, like he's kind of fumbled, like he's been clumsy, but he was right in the contest and leapt. Timing wasn't bad for competing in the contest, but collected a player instead.
It is interesting because I had to put my bias of my Tom Lynch thoughts aside for all the times he hasn't.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't like Tom Lynch either.
But it was innocuous, but then I compare that to other things players have gone for now for head-high contact, and I think he has to get the 3 weeks. I think there's been so much now where you don't have to do much, but if he's, the hands have come down when he's realised he can't take the footy, and that's hit the player in the head, and that's where the AFL sits right now. So I think we just need a better system of understanding what the grading is. I think that's where the problem really lies. We need to know what each act looks like and whether that's with video or drawn out examples. It'll give us a better idea of where we're going from here, because I was even shocked that Adelaide didn't challenge with Pedler last week because he got one of the arms wasn't pinned and the head didn't hit the floor and he still got a week and they took it. So I think the teams are just as confused as we are.
I mean, yeah, it's an interesting one that you say that, because then we hear out of a lot of other corners where they're going, it's consistent. I'm like, it is, because people are consistently getting suspended, but should they all be getting suspended? Like, I mean, the Tom Lynch one I think is fairly straightforward, and you actually surmised it really well. I think if he had continued that contest and just had hands in the air, even though he clearly wasn't going to be able to actually mark the ball and would have looked like a clown as a result. Yep. But if he'd have if his visible outward indication was he was actually contesting the mark, nothing to worry about, despite the unfortunate contact, because
he came to protect himself instead. Yeah, that was what started him up straight. I think
it's a strange one. It'll be interesting.
Well, I think the real question one for this week is the Harry Mackay incident with Sheasel, because
that's
kind of the other way around for me. I saw it live and I thought it's not a good look, but I also thought it was probably only a fine, because it wasn't a forceful motion. It was really just a fend, but he's fended him straight in the head, and there was no damage to Sheasel. He bumped right up, and they've given him a week. So Carlton, they got given the extra day due to the public holiday to respond to that, so they've got until tomorrow now to
extra day of legal team
challenge it. But I feel like they almost have to. It was a weird incident considering some of the ones we've seen people just get a fine for already.
Yeah. So with that acting as a bit of a segue into our next sequence there, and talking about some of the other headlines from the week / the round itself, Paddy McCartan's head. Talking about head contact.
That was horrible to watch, considering that there seemed to be nothing in it. It was all force he generated himself, really, other than maybe the other player getting under his leg. And something that you see happen probably hundreds of times a game with the level of force that was in it. And he was not just slightly dazed, he was gone.
It was an absolute mess. I didn't understand.
Which begs the question of, as much as I love watching the McCartans play footy, they're both rippers, and obviously doing a Defenders podcast, they're right up there in our favourites. there's a level of, is it in his best interest to play football? Because we see all the issues that come later. And if an incident that innocuous is going to cause him to get a concussion, it is probably well beyond him, for health reasons, being able to play the sport going forward. And that's a hard discussion to have. I think that people with greater medical minds than mine are going to be able to talk about it in the coming weeks, but it didn't look good. And it was such a small incident that caused such a large outcome.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel like the more he goes out on the field, the more negligent it seems like the Swans, the Paddy, and potentially even the AFL are being, despite the fact that, they've got their protocols, they've got their processes, they're all the standard at the moment. We know, and we're seeing it obviously with the action at the moment that's going on behind the scenes, that whatever the best practice was at the time clearly wasn't good enough either. And we're probably still not there now. There's still so much that people are learning about concussions and CDE and all those sorts of things. So I wonder if the AFL doesn't need to intervene and say, look, we can't, and not even for legal and liability things, I'm sure at this point, if he goes out there again, he's probably got to sign something that says, that's a way of, we are not liable, this is a you decision. But
just for his own well-being.
Yeah. Sorry, guys,
I look
retire him.
Look at, obviously Marcus Adams is at a step away from Brisbane, and it was kind of heartbreaking hearing Chris Fagan talk about him a couple of weeks ago. After that game against Melbourne, and they were asking, how much would it be good to have him out there, and Fagan really kind of said, we're not even thinking about having him out there ever again at this point. We just want him to be able to, function
live his life,
he used to be able to. So when you hear things like that about someone like Adams, whose history of concussion is obviously concerning, but not even in the league of McCartans, you do wonder if there's a level of protection they have to put on these players to kind of save them from themselves, because of course they're going to want to keep playing footy. That's what they've done their whole lives and what
exactly.
they love. But there's the level where you're going to have to stop them, save them from themselves, I think.
It's what they love. There's a huge income that they get from it, financially, playing AFL, as long as you don't blow it on something stupid, it can set you up for the rest of your life. So sure. There's all these things that be bubbling along in the background, but at some point, Paddy, the club, or the AFL needs to go, this could kill you.
Yep.
Maybe the damage is already done. We need, and especially when you get such a small incident like that is causing that sort of result, then the harder questions need to be asked. It's not like he copped a forearm to the head. It wasn't like it was a head clash or some other significant collision. This was, he grazed the dirt. It was really nothing.
And he only fell, realistically, 10, 20 centimeters from where his head was to where it hit. It wasn't a heavy impact in any way.
His body, he's actually, his knees and his core had actually taken the majority of the hit when he'd hit the ground, and then he kind of lurched forward to try and reach for the ball and hit the ground as a result. It was such a nothing movement. So it's stuff like that then makes you really start to think, I don't think your head's up to it, mate. And if you think more broadly, you've talked about Marcus Adams, you think about, obviously, just coming back for us this week with Cole Jasny, and the fact that his brother, Cade, went through the exact thing and ended his career, and perhaps wisely, he didn't have as many, they weren't as profound for the most part, but it was clearly enough that was already starting to become problematic, and they cut their losses, for want of a better phrase. And then you look at Paddy and he just keeps going, and it's crazy to me.
Yeah, well, especially after they, he did cut it for a while. He missed, I think it was 3 years of AFL footy.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't get out there because of concussion, and to have it happen like that, obviously played a whole year last year, but to have it happen like that so early in the season this year from something so small would really have you considering where you're at.
Yeah. So sending him all the best. Same applies to Jake Cole-Jasny that's come back for us this week. Great to see him back on the field. Hope he stays healthy. Hope both of them stay healthy, and any other player who's kind of taken. We've seen a few head blows this weekend, so let's hope that they're all well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gather round is coming up.
Yes.
What do you make of the fact that this party is going off to Adelaide? The entire competition's there. You've got all 18 teams. What are your thoughts on all things gather round?
This year it's turned out to be very handy for Geelong to give us an extra game to win our way back into the top
true.
four. So I can't complain from that perspective. I do still think it's a weird idea. I see where they're coming from. I think it may have been better executed as some sort of form of pre-season competition to get fans to the footy in one state, but it is weird to think we've got Collingwood, who are on fire and have lost one game, playing St Kilda, who are top of the table and haven't lost yet, playing on a Sunday afternoon in Adelaide when that would be a 90,000 crowd at the MCG.
And I guess they
the
couldn't
weather
have known,
forecast-
but
touch wood, the weather forecast has it raining all weekend as well. So whether the Adelaide Oval will hold up is interesting. But outside of that, I do like the concept. I think it's cool to have a full festival of footy in a state that loves footy. It'll be really good to see, how much, colour and support is out there for a full weekend, and at some grounds that don't get AFL games is another part of it. But
yeah, I think they're up to Norwood, for example. There was, I can't remember all the different venues, but I think Norwood was one of them.
Yeah, so only 5 at Adelaide Oval. So there's obviously four other grounds being brought into it. So
Norwood Oval, Adelaide Hills, and yeah, that's it. There's one game at Adelaide Hills, 2 at Norwood, or 3 at Norwood. I don't know. There's a lengthy list here. 3 at Norwood.
3 at Norwood, right? Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I'm sure it'll be fine, but it's an interesting little quirk that I think some teams will be blaming for their fixturing or something. I'm sure someone will find a way to complain, but it's good for Geelong. Geelong have a great record in Adelaide, and they're playing at Adelaide Oval where they've got a pretty good record too. So.
And West Coast don't travel, so it's kind of worked out.
Yeah, it's a real good
right
combo. I'd rather play West Coast at Adelaide Oval than in Perth.
Yeah,
so I see that for sure.
I mean, and even like the fact that particular game is the precursor to the Pies and Saints game that you're talking about, like it's kind of the opening act. It's strange. Also, logistically, how are they going to do it? Because I mean, do they only have 2 major rooms at Adelaide?
Yeah, they'll have to. Are they at the same ground?
Yeah,
like that?
so the Cats and the Eagles 110 at Adelaide Oval, followed by the Pies and the Saints at 4:50.
That'll be interesting then.
There's half an hour between the end.
Funnel out and funnel in very quickly.
Paddy, I know you had a great win. Get out. We need to get.
No roaming Brian in the rooms this week. That's called off.
So I don't know. We'll see how all that goes, but it's going to be interesting. And I think I like the idea that we're having these big sort of celebrations, and I think a lot of it's been brought on by COVID and seeing what was possible by the teams being forced into certain parts of the country. So I guess now that they're able to lean right into it and anyone can just attend, it'll be interesting to see what this culture, this footy culture looks like when it's all thrust together in one weekend. It's certainly going to be huge for Adelaide and presumably elsewhere if they go elsewhere in subsequent years, which, unless this is an absolute disaster, I feel like that's going to happen. There's a few good games in there. So obviously there's Collingwood and the Saints that we've discussed. Maybe because of the fact that both teams aren't flying. The Giants and the Hawks might be interesting as well. You've obviously got Port and Adelaide getting some home games there. The Bombers, who are obviously up and about statistically at the moment, going head-to-head with the D's, should be an interesting one. Potentially. Again, maybe for all the wrong reasons, but Freo and the Suns.
Being in Adelaide could be a really interesting twist to that Essendon and Melbourne game, because it doesn't have the caveat of being played in Melbourne and all the differences that come there. So that could make it interesting and very fun, I think.
And yeah, I guess kicking it all off being the Crows versus the potentially Harry Michaelis Blues. So at home, they've also got the home factor. So
Crows are flying, which was a shock to me. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. They're looking in really good form, especially up forward.
That forward line, holy hell.
So dangerous. I loved watching Rochelle first half of last year, and he petered out, as a lot of young players do, but he's back in full force, and Rankin's killing it, and Thilthorpe showing everything that everyone expected when he got drafted. So they could be a real force to be reckoned with, and it's a big scalp for them to try and pull off this week. If they can beat Carlton, then it's kind of like you were saying about Essendon. If they can pull that one off, then they're really here. So it's a big game, I think, to launch everything with the weekend.
And the final point of conversation is something that's been raging quite a bit over the course of this weekend, considering how a few teams have actually leveraged the kind of rules this weekend. The sub. Now, Geelong applied it today with all kind of, I don't know, like we never
Geelong
actually
really
dropped him. He was always he was the
Yeah.
sub. It's kind of this weird thing, the way they kind of played the Ollie Henry, but we saw it with Dyson Heppel and Phillips for Essendon. I think there was one other example as well that's escaping me. It's
Cochrane at Richmond, they did the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think Hardwick hit the nail on the head this week when he said, I don't know why we bother naming the teams and then the sub later when we can do late changes anyway. So surely when we name the teams on a Thursday afternoon, you can say that one player is the sub. So instead of saying they were dropped from the team sheet, when you know they're going to be the sub in 2 days' time, just announce them as a sub on the Thursday. So we're not getting the weird dropped from the team sheet and announced as a sub that we're getting at the moment, because it does look silly when we have 4 players get dropped, quote unquote, last week who all play.
Yeah, it's a weird one, because I think the AFL's I don't know. There's maybe some sort of logic about it. Well, if we announce a sub, then that's giving away our hand strategically somewhat. I'd argue even the better thing is just select 23 players. There's your 23, and one of these 23 will be the sub.
Yeah, pick it from a 5-man interchange bench.
Yeah. Which we know, like, even the interchange is rarely accurate. I mean, Danger was listed as full forward for us today going into the game.
Yeah, a lot of teams have been taking the absolute piss with team sheets for a while now. So, and I can't blame them. So,
I mean, yeah, why don't we put Jake Kolajasny full forward just for a bit of a laugh? He's bobbed up and kicked a few goals in recent years. Let's have fun.
Almost launched one today. That was exciting.
Yeah, he was getting close there, actually. I thought, oh, here we go. And he can't curse us because we're already up by about 70 points. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, but maybe just put 23 people down on the sheet, pick your sub later on. That way you can still kind of maintain the secrecy and the strategic element of the whole thing. But there's no clouded confusion like we've seen this week. Keep it simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, time to cast our eyes forward to the game against the West Coast Eagles next week. Obviously, as you're talking about, there's going to be plenty of chatter in your local papers and the local scene about the Eagles, more so than the Dockers. But jumping into that game itself, the last 3 outings, the Cats have an average winning margin of 67 points.
Yeah, they've delivered some of the biggest losses in West Coast history the last few times they've met. Mostly at Canini Park, obviously helps.
There was one close one last year, about 15 points, but then also 95 or 97 or something.
Yeah,
like that, so.
The close one was over here. I remember going to that and almost feeling embarrassed for West Coast when their fans gave them a standing ovation for not losing by too much. That's shocking levels. But they play well against Geelong in Perth, and they always have. In years where, like the year Geelong made the grand final and lost to Richmond, they lost to West Coast over here.
Yes.
That year they lost to Collingwood here and then beat Freo by a gargantuan amount, which if you looked at Freo and West Coast that year, you would have thought that'd be swapped. So being outside of Perth, I'm happier with. I think Adelaide Oval's been a pretty happy hunting ground for Geelong in a lot of respects. They've won a lot of games there that probably could have been either ways. So I'm pretty confident without being overconfident going in, considering the first 3 weeks we saw. But the biggest anomaly on it has to be West Coast injuries.
Yeah, there's a bit like St Kilda. They don't have much of a team to field at the moment. It's just that the Saints are actually putting it all together. I guess the Saints clearly had far more depth than what a lot of people have given them credit for, whereas the Eagles have sadly got not much left. So I don't expect the result to differ too much to the last couple of outings, especially if the Cats have kind of unlocked everything again from this second half. If they maintain even half of that rage that they had in the second half, then you'd like to think the Cats would win by 50 points plus. But who knows? Maybe the genie shoots back in the bottle.
Yeah, look, I think I touched on it a bit earlier. We're saying that there's a lot of players who needed the confidence from that second half today, who looked a bit off the first few weeks, and there was just some kicks they didn't trust themselves with. They would have the last few years, and I think the back line getting put back together helps with that too. Where like you're worried that if it's going to slingshot and there's no Kolajasny or Stewart down there, that it's going to turn into a goal.
Now they're back.
Now you trust yourself to make that kick, and I think it'll be a lot different Geelong team going forward over the next few weeks. We're going to see, and it should be you'd hope a comfortable win. I'll take a win of any kind.
Yeah,
but I'd be disappointed if it's not 5 or more goals.
So the ins and outs. We've already discussed Gary Rowan, and I guess our gut feel is he's going to at least cop a week, probably. So in that instance, who comes in for him? Because an important point to the whole conversation is the VFL team got flogged today.
Smashed. But the positive side was that Bruin was close to best on ground. He had 34 touches.
Good.
So he was really good. Simpson had 25 and a few goal assists with his silk through the middle. So the main thing I noticed was that the AFL players played well. It's just that our drop-off there to the VFL players is a lot bigger than I think it's been in previous seasons. I think Jackson McLaughlin's injured at the moment as well, which isn't helping. But Bruin's the obvious one to come in, I think, because obviously Henry just takes Rowan's spot in the forward line.
Yeah.
Bose can flick back to where Buse was in the back line, and Bruin just goes into the middle. So
I've been real happy with Bose so far.
Yeah, his kicking is brilliant. He gives an extra dimension to the game that I think has been lacking in the first few weeks when he wasn't there, or when he at least wasn't in the midfield.
Yeah.
Whereas Bruin, I think it's interesting to see how little game time he had in the first few weeks, and whether that's a fitness thing or just getting him in amongst the team thing. He's the logical in. It's that or Parfitt. But the reason I had Parfitt earmarked was that we were lacking contested footy, which we certainly weren't this week. So, but Bruin's probably the logical one, and Parfitt is the second.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. Unless there's someone else that they really are keen to throw a game to, that's been doing something really special, but no one's really standing out. It is really those known commodities, those boys who we've seen play games for the Cats before, semi-regular, or brand new and regular straight out the gate, that feel like the obvious walk-ups there. So it'll just be interesting to see how they play it. Blitzarv's ribs might play a factor in the whole thing, and actually that's something I should have touched on before. The knee up at the ruck contest is becoming really problematic, especially for the Cats.
The AFL handling of it was very strange. Like I got Chris Scott's question of it because it was a dangerous act, but then they tried to give a fine to Dehghani for a rule that wasn't even in place before that, and then when Carlton pointed out that it wasn't a rule, they had to take back the fine and then send out a dossier to all the clubs. And look, it is an ugly look when both players' feet are still on the ground. There's no need for that knee to come up if you're not jumping.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty flat and simple one to pass out. But how does it get adjudged now that it has been sent out as a letter to the clubs? The clubs know it's not an okay action.
Yeah.
I probably just a fine at this point, but it is a bad look. But I do wonder if we're switching from a bounce to a ball up, which is a lot of the discussion going forward, how much more often is that going to be the case? Because if the players are just judging exactly where the ball's going to be if neither their feet leave the ground, I think the likelihood of that happening is more often.
Was that one... for some reason, I feel like that particular incident with Blitzarves was because they'd bounced it. I think it was a dud, and then didn't they throw it up for that one? Yeah,
it was a throw up, which is where they're heading towards.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, and I think the other one against Dehghani was also for a throw up, not a bounce. So that's another one to throw into the ring for confusion around that rule and whether they want to change it or not. But it's definitely something I think that needs to go because it's a dangerous act. We've seen obviously Stanley missed a week with those bruised ribs, and Blitzarves might need to as well.
Could have too.
He was down for a long time, and so long had to stop play when the ball came back around.
He was unfortunately right in the way, so they had to call it there. But yeah, it's a really bad look, and it's only a matter of time before that really does actually break someone's rib. Just the right spot, right time, and suddenly they're missing 4 or 5 weeks, and it's not on. So
yeah, it's a really good chance for the AFL to get out in front of it instead of reacting after it's happened. It's a good chance for them to get in front of a really bad injury before it can happen.
Yeah, I mean, watch it happen to if it happened to Brodie Grundy, for example, and suddenly Melbourne are down their 2 gun ruckmen. You watch the noise that would emanate out of the media and the Melbourne fans, all 10 of them, and like everyone else, because it's horrible. You've already lost one to a genuine knee problem, and then something so stupid like a knee thing. We understand where it comes from. It's usually been this protective thing. You don't need to protect yourself from Mark Blitzarves. Let's be real. So
especially when both players have both feet flat on the ground.
Yeah.
I don't know if it needs to come up for the protection there either.
Exactly right. So it's a bit like the Toby Green fly kick thing, which actually we saw at one point there. Tyson Stengel nearly copped one during the game today. Yes. I don't know if you noticed that. So
I did.
As if he's not got enough to contend with at the moment, let alone people fly kick him in the face.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see where they go, but I think this week's a chance to make a statement and at least put down a fine and just say that this is, we've sent out the dossier to all clubs now.
You were warned.
And it's no longer a football act. So,
I guess we'll keep it really simple for this one. The tip for the week.
Yeah, our Cats here. I think I'd be picking by 40, 45 points or so.
All right. Well, here's a little bit of trivia for you about the West Coast Eagles, and I'll ask the questions for you first. There's a soft. Well, given you're a WA man, I feel like there's probably a few that you already know anyway, so it is an extra wrench in the mix. But for those following along at home, see if you can come up with some answers as well. What year were the Eagles formed?
Formed is a great question. I entered the AFL, I think it was 87.
Yes.
So I formed, I guess it'd be 86.
Yeah, you've nailed that one. I think as long as you've got 87 in your head, then you can kind of work backwards, and 1 year is pretty sensible in that sense. Who was the first captain?
That one I don't know. Was it Hardy?
No, Ross Glendenning.
Glendenning, yep, checks out for the medal.
And obviously Mick Malthouse came across as the Eagle and became the Eagles' first premiership coach. Who was he coaching before that, though? Which kind of gets forgotten because we think about West Coast and his premierships. We think about Collingwood and his premiership there.
Was he at Richmond before that or Brisbane?
Neither. It was Footscray.
Neither.
Or the Western Bulldogs,
Footscray.
whatever I guess Footscray at the time. So
Lee Matthews went from Collingwood to Brisbane, the other way around.
Yeah. So it's an interesting a few pieces of trivia there for any of the unacquainted Geelong supporters there. And look, heaps and heaps of others as well, but I didn't want to wade too deep into the whole thing. We don't want to celebrate West Coast too much. It's a Geelong show. But some little nuggets there for people to explore if they want.
My favourite Glendinning trivia is that one year he overrode the votes on the Ross Glendinning medal and took it off of Ashley Sampi and gave it to Michael Gardner.
I hope there's nothing.
Medias and personalities voted, and he went, no, I don't think so.
And then he vetoed it.
After me. Yeah, vetoed it, which he can't do anymore because it's the Glendinning Allen medal. But there's been a bit of a discussion the last few years over here of retroactively giving Sampi a medal.
Yeah, that's... What the hell? Okay, I don't think I'd ever heard about that one. What? Okay, all right, I'll leave it there. Well, we're basically at the end of the show here, so we'll wrap a few things up. Thanks so much, Jack, for coming on the show and sharing all your thoughts on the Cats and this week and the games to come. As I said, and before I kind of wrap up all the Hoop Show side of things, where should people tune into all of your content, any of your thoughts, social media, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so on social media, we're just the Back Pocket AU. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. The podcast is pretty much everywhere, so we don't have any visual, it's all audio, but it's still on YouTube. It's also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen. So can find it pretty much anywhere, and it's always shared to Facebook every week once it goes live, which is usually Wednesday mornings.
That's awesome. Make sure to check it all out. As I said at the beginning of the show, some fantastic stuff that they're doing. Always entertaining. And again, and you touched on it at the beginning of the show, the focus on the defender is awesome. Now, obviously, it's become broader than that, but celebrating the defender is awesome.
The Scarlett Silvani medal. So we give votes a 5-4-3-2-1 format each week, the both of us. Last year's winner was Tom Barras, letting out, I think it was Stephen May and Sam Collins. So bit of defender love is always nice throughout the year.
That's awesome. And let's continue to elevate that one. We'll make it an official AFL endorsed trophy or medal at some point in the future. On the Hoop Show side, please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. There's heaps of awesome stuff that's going to be going up there. I've got a little YouTube rant that I think I'm going to be tossing up there about the state of the VFL situation at the moment for the Cats specifically, and what consequences that may or may not have for the Cats team, the AFL team going forward, so stay tuned for that one. Ben's obviously always churning out stuff there as well. We've got Behind the Play, which for anyone who's not caught that recently, the most recent episode was with AFLW Cats, AFLW player Brooke Plummer, and this week I'm going to be joined by Shannon Burns, Cats runner, and good luck charm, because apparently the last couple of years all he can do is go to premiership winning teams, so hopefully the fact that he's staying with the Cats bodes well again for the remainder of the year. So stay tuned for that one on Tuesday morning at 6/7 a.m. for YouTube and podcast feeds. Massive shout out to our patrons who are helping keep us afloat. It's only a small amount each month, but it always helps, and we really, really appreciate your support. There's a whole bunch of awesome stuff that you can get there, from the early access to things like Behind the Play to the player cards that Ben's been making, which are genuinely fantastic. Like, the AFL needs to just recruit him for that sort of thing. Cool. It's awesome. So make sure to check all that out as well. And on the Behind the Play side, make sure to subscribe on podcast feeds as well. I may as well give an extra plug to my own stuff there and stuff you, Ben. Jack, again, thanks so much for coming on the show, sharing the love of the Cats, some insights into the game this week and next, especially through that lens of being based in WA. It's a really awesome perspective that is really, really handy going into Gather Round this week, despite the fact that they're not actually playing in WA in the end. It was awesome to have you on, mate.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's always good to talk Cat stuff. I know it's a bit blurry in my background, but I was going to try and set this up before, which was my
very nice. I can see it.
Medals frame there, but I couldn't quite organise that.
No, that's fine. And those Google Meet settings can kind of blur some of that stuff out, so it's no dramas at all there. Really looking the part anyway, and again, fantastic insight. So thanks so much for that. And also, the audio listeners wouldn't know any different. So
true.
Please. Cats fans, if you haven't already, make sure to, as I said, subscribe. Thanks for checking us out. Remain Geelong strong. Be one in the hoops. And we'll see you next week.